So if you take a look through the history of popular music, there have been some great artists. But there's one group that stands out as probably the most well-known group of all time, and that is the Beatles. Now, the Beatles' music has existed for nearly 70 years, so it's quite hard to deny that in that time they've had quite a big impact on music and the electric guitar. In this video, we're going to be talking about 5 ways the Beatles can improve your guitar playing. Over the years, they have done some really innovative things in the studio, and they've really kind of helped shape the way that we still use the electric guitar today. Many of the things the Beatles pioneered in the early days were things that simply didn't exist at that point in time, but are now things that we as guitar players take for granted. So like I said, in this video, we're going to talk about 5 things that you can learn from the Beatles. You can use them in your own guitar playing and feel the impact straight away. This video is brought to you in partnership with musicradar.com. Down below in the description of this video, there's a link over to the Music Radar website with a full-length article that I've written to accompany this video. So this is a great learning aid to this video, so go and check that out as well. It's got more information in there about all of the things I talk about in this video. Alright, so the first thing we're going to talk about is a songwriting tip, and this is using the relative minor of a chord progression to create a contrasting section to a song. So let's say you've got a chord progression that's based around major chords, you want to put something in that's a complete contrast, but you want to keep a sort of feeling of familiarity through the piece as well. You can actually create a new segment of the song that starts from the relative minor. Now, all major keys have a relative minor and all minor keys have a relative major. This is a little theory concept, and I'm not going to go too deep into the theory in this video, but if you want to learn more about that kind of stuff, let me know down below in the comments. But in a nutshell, there are keys that exist that are parallel keys. So C major and A minor are a good example because they're the ones I'm going to be doing in this example. Now, the key of C major, all the chords and notes of that key are the same as those of the key of A minor. The difference is, in the key of C major, C being the major chord is our root. This is the chord that we're kind of emphasizing. In A minor, it's the A minor. Now, because these two keys share all the same notes and chords, they're known as relative keys. So if I'm playing a chord progression in the key of C major, I can then add a section of the song that uses the same chords, but starts from an A minor or leans heavily on that A minor. And what that does is it creates a contrasting feel. It will feel like I've gone to a minor key or even changed keys, but in reality, I'm actually still doing exactly the same thing. I'm still playing the same key, but that relative minor will make it feel like it shifted slightly. This is a great way to create contrasting sections or moods inside of a song. So the Beatles song that I'm going to be using as a reference for this is the song Misery. Now there's a progression in the verse, which is in the key of C major, which uses a C, an F and a G chord, but then the chorus uses an A minor, a C and a G chord. So we have this contrasting feel. So the chords I'm going to be using for the verse are C major, F major, and G major. But then the contrasting chords for the chorus are A minor, C major, and G major. So these chords are all part of the same key, both from the key of C major and A minor, but using that relative minor as the kind of chord that we're leaning on for the next section creates a contrast. The song goes like this. So as you can see, when I move to the section that starts with an A minor, it creates a feeling shift because then it feels like we're going into a minor key because we have this major progression. When we flip to the A minor, it makes the song feel like it pulls you somewhere different. This is a great little trick you can use in your own songwriting to create contrasting sections or contrasting moods in the same song. The second thing that we're going to talk about is actually one of my personal favorite ideas that the Beatles used a lot in their songs, and that is introducing the minor 4 chord into a major chord progression. Now, in a major chord progression, the 4 chord is typically a major chord, but what we're going to do in this example, which comes from the song In My Life, is actually use a minor 4 chord as like a passing chord on the way back to the root. This is something the Beatles would do a lot in their songs, and it creates a really different emotional dynamic within the chord progression. So the chords I'm going to be using for this one are A major, E major, so that's my 1 and my 5 chord, F sharp minor, which is my 6 chord, which is my relative minor, but then my 4 chord is a D major. Now, in this key, we don't typically have a D minor chord, but what the Beatles often do is they'll bring that minor chord in on the way back to the 1. So what we end up with is this walk down through the minor 4 chord. So it's 4 to minor 4 back to the 1. And it just resolves very nicely back on that 1 chord. This is something you can use in any chord progression where you've got a move that goes from the 4 to the 1 chord. Putting that minor 4 in there creates this little emotional contrast, and it makes the overall progression take on a slight minor feel. This works great in slow songs or ballads where you just want to create a bit of tension before you go back to the start of the progression. Like I said, this is used in the song In My Life, which goes like this. That is one of my personal favourite guitar tricks you can learn from a Beatles song, and I think it's a great way to take a major chord progression and just add something a little interesting on the way back to the 1 chord. Now, typically, we wouldn't have that minor 4 chord in there as a standard chord, because if I was to play that same progression with the minor 4, it would sound like this. On its own, it doesn't quite resolve nicely, but if you put it in as a passing chord on the way back to the 1 chord, it brings you back to the start of the progression very nicely. Adds a lot of interest to an existing chord progression. The third thing we're going to talk about is the way that the Beatles would use arpeggios and single note lines to outline a chord progression. So both John Lennon and George Harrison were great guitar players in their own respect, and they had very different styles, but their styles also complemented each other very well. And they had this way of creating contrasting rhythmic parts that weaved together. The song we're going to be using to look at this is the song I Saw Her Standing There. And this has a really interesting kind of flow and weaving between the 2 guitars going on. So one guitar is playing a pretty solid rhythm with full chords all the way through, and the other guitar is alternating between different chord voicings and single note lines to kind of weave in and out of the other. So the main rhythm part uses 3 chords, and this is based on a 12-bar blues sort of idea. The chords we're using is this voicing of an E7 chord, which is kind of like a C chord played on the 7th fret of the A, with your little finger playing the 7th fret of the G, and we've also got the 2 E strings played open. Then we're going to an A dominant 7 chord, but with the little finger playing the 8th fret on the B. And then the 5 chord that we're going to be using is this B dominant 7 with the little finger playing the 10 on the B. So that's just our 3 chords, the 1, 4, and 5. And then the rhythm that you hear these chords for the intro and the verse goes like this. So while that's going on, the lead guitar is doing 2 very different things. Over the intro, he's using this triad here, which is the 4 on the G, the 3 on the B, and the 4 on the high E. This is actually an E dominant 7 triad, much like that chord we're playing, but just played here. But it's actually missing the E note, which would be here on the 2nd fret. Doesn't really matter so much that that little triad doesn't have an E present. It still functions as an E7 chord, but all this is doing is framing the full chord that you just heard. So over the intro, it's playing this. So that's just a really simple part. That is just that E7 chord playing away, highlighting what the main chord is doing, and it's just got that little lead lick in there, which is the 3 on the B, and then a 3, 2 open on the G. Then in the verse, that guitar moves to a single note run that highlights the chord changes. So over the E chord, it's playing this. Then over the A chord, just holds an open A for an entire bar. Back to the E chord. Then over the B chord, it actually pauses for the first part of the bar, and then it does this simple lead run. So altogether that part sounds like this. So even though those two guitar parts are very, very different, they actually complement each other perfectly. When you put them together on top of each other, you get that weaving guitar sound that you hear on the track. So the fourth thing that we're going to talk about is the way the Beatles would use what's known as a deceptive cadence. Now, in most Western music, we have a series of cadences or resolutions that we're accustomed to hearing. And these are things that make us feel like a song is either familiar or the sound of the song is pleasing to us. It's because certain chords fit together in a certain way. Now, a deceptive cadence is when you have a chord progression that may sound familiar or may sound like it's working perfectly fine, and then all of a sudden, a chord appears inside that progression that you don't know. And this is something that you can use in your own songwriting and that the Beatles used to great effect. This creates a feeling of unease or tension in a progression, and it kind of makes you feel like you're going somewhere a little bit different with the song. The whole point of a deceptive cadence is not to change key, but it's to introduce another chord that isn't necessarily part of the progression you're using, and then take it straight out and resolve it back to where you need to be. So the Beatles song that I'm going to show you that uses a deceptive cadence is the track P.S. I Love You. Now what this track does is it's in the key of D major, but it introduces a flat 6 chord. In the key of D, the 6th chord is the B minor, which is the relative minor of D major. But what we're doing here is we're actually using that B minor, but at some point in the progression we're also introducing a flat 6, which is a B flat major. And this is not a chord that's in the key. So because this chord is not in the key, it's not going to fit as well as other chords. If I play a D to a B minor, that's going to fit because it's the 1 to the 6. That works nice, but if we go to the flat 6, it has a bit of a strange sound because that chord does not have a direct relationship to the D major chord. But it's a chord that we're introducing into the progression before going back to the chords that we expect to hear. So this song uses quite a few different chords. It's got a D, E minor, there's an A major in there, and a B minor. Those are all chords that we expect to hear, but then at some point we go to this B flat major. That then goes to a C, which is in the key. So that kind of pulls us back to where we need to go, and that resolves back to the D once more. So it sounds like this. So the introduction of that deceptive cadence creates a little bit of a twist in the progression there. It pulls you somewhere that you're not expecting to go. In your own songwriting, this can be really interesting to create a little hook, something to bring the listener in and make them feel that sort of tension before you resolve back to where you need it to go. Try Deceptive Cadence in your own chord progressions, and it will definitely introduce some interesting results. And the fifth and final thing I want to show you is Paul McCartney's really interesting fingerstyle technique on the song Blackbird. Now, in many interviews, Paul has been very open with his inspiration from this song coming from classical music. So a lot of the interval choices in Blackbird are very classically inspired, but the fingerstyle pattern is something really interesting that you can use, and it creates a really cool sound or really cool rhythmic texture in a song. Now I'm going to play it first and then we'll break down what I'm doing. So the first part that I play isn't really what we're focusing on. This is just the run up to the part that I am going to be talking about, but I'm going to play it anyway just so you've got this in context with the song. So the bit that I'm referencing is that rhythm when I'm up here. Now this is often shown as being entirely fingerpicked, but if you actually watch how McCartney plays this, he's not actually fingerpicking every note. He's actually doing a combination of fingerpicked notes and mini strums with his finger. So in the context of this song, what I'm playing is this chord here where I'm playing the 10th fret on the A string, and I'm muting the D with the underside of that finger. The G is played open, and I'm playing the 12th fret on the B string. So you've got those three notes. Now this technique can be applied to any other chord, which we'll talk about in a moment. But in the context of Blackbird, this is often notated as being entirely fingerpicked. But what Paul actually does is a combination of fingerpicking and mini strums with the index finger. And he does play this with only two fingers as well. So what we're doing here is we're playing this. So to break that down, I'm playing the two fretted notes together with my thumb and my index finger, so that's the A and the B strings. Then we come into this little strummed picked motion. We're doing a little flick with the index finger, almost like we're strumming the G and B strings together, and then picking the B on the up. So it's two together, little strum down, single pick up. And in the second half, we're doing a very similar thing, but we're going thumb only for the A string, index finger upstroke on the B, and then another mini strum on the down with the G and B together. So there's a lot of double index finger points here. So we've got the first part, and the second part. You'll notice how my index finger is alternating each time. So it's both notes together, down strum, up pick. Then it's thumb, up pick, down strum. So each time it's thumb and two movements with the index finger. Thumb, down, up, thumb, up, down. When you put that together, it sounds like this. And then once more in context of the song. The cool thing with this technique is you're not limited to just using this inside that Beatles song. You can take that entire finger picking pattern that I just showed you and apply that to your own chord progressions, come up with some really cool ideas. And you can even throw in a little minor four like I did there to add a little bit more of that Beatles vibe to your progressions. So there are 5 things you can learn from the Beatles that will make you a better guitar player. The Beatles have done so much innovation and so much experimentation over the years that there are other things in their songs that they've done beyond the things we've talked about today that are still being used today by guitar players. Let me know down below in the comments what your favorite Beatles thing is that you're using in your own playing style. I'd love to hear what you guys have learned from the Beatles as well. Let me know down below how you guys have gotten on with these techniques and how you're using them. Don't forget to check out that article down below that's linked in the description over to the Music Radar website that has a full write-up of everything we've talked about in this video. Thank you guys so much for watching as always. Leave me a comment down below and let me know what you thought of the video. Hit the like button, and if you're new here, please consider subscribing to the channel as well. And I'll see you guys very, very soon. Thank you so much for watching as always.